Colonel David Harrison stood in the weapons storage area at Nui Dat in May 1968 and observed something that made him question whether the Australian military was operating with fundamentally different equipment standards than the American military. An Australian machine gun team was conducting maintenance and demonstration of their support weapon. The weapon was the Bren gun, a light machine gun that had been designed decades earlier, but that the Australian military continued to use. The weapon was heavier and more complex than the American M60 machine gun that American infantry units used. An American officer standing next to Harrison made a comment. "That weapon looks too big for one man to handle. That weapon should require two men to operate effectively. That is why we use a two-man gun team with the M60, but we position the gunner and ammunition carrier separately. One man can carry the M60 and fire it independently if necessary." An Australian sergeant overheard this comment and approached Harrison and the American officer. The sergeant introduced himself as Sergeant William Torrance, the same Australian soldier whose physique had impressed American military personnel. "Sir," Torrance said to the American officer, "the Bren gun is designed to be handled and fired by one man. It is heavier than your M60, but it is more robust, it is more reliable, it is more accurate. One man can carry it, fire it, and maintain it."
Two men make a gun team because two men can provide better security and better ammunition supply. But the weapon itself is designed for one man. The American officer was skeptical. That weapon is too heavy for one man to carry effectively through jungle terrain. One man carrying that weapon would be at a disadvantage compared to a man carrying an M60. Torrance's response was confident. "I can carry this weapon through jungle terrain. I can fire it. I can maintain it. One man can handle this weapon." This exchange prompted a demonstration. Torrance was given the opportunity to demonstrate his capability to carry the Bren gun through a designated course that simulated jungle terrain and tactical movement. Torrance carried the Bren gun through the course with apparent ease. Torrance moved quickly. Torrance moved quietly. Torrance demonstrated that one man could indeed carry and operate the weapon effectively through difficult terrain. The demonstration impressed the American officer. The officer acknowledged that Torrance had demonstrated capability to carry and operate the weapon that the officer had believed was too heavy for one man to handle. But the demonstration also raised questions about American assumptions regarding weapon weight and weapon handling. American military doctrine emphasized that certain weapons were inherently too heavy for one man to handle effectively. The Australian demonstration suggested that this assumption might be incorrect. By June 1968, the incident involving the Bren gun and Torrance's demonstration of one-man carrying capability had become part of military folklore. The incident had challenged American assumptions about weapon weight and weapon handling. One American commander made an observation that captured the significance of the incident. "The Australians are demonstrating that American assumptions about weapon weight and one-man carrying capability may be incorrect. If a man is trained properly, and if his physical conditioning is adequate, he can carry and operate weapons that American doctrine considers too heavy for one man." This suggests that American doctrine may be based on assumptions about soldier capability rather than on actual capability. This observation highlighted something significant. American military doctrine regarding weapon weight and one-man carrying capability was based partly on explicit testing and analysis, but was also based partly on implicit assumptions about what was reasonable to expect from soldiers. The Australians, with their emphasis on physical conditioning and on developing soldiers capable of sustained extended performance, had created soldiers who could carry and operate weapons that American doctrine considered too heavy for one man. By July 1968, American military leadership had become interested in understanding whether American assumptions about weapon weight and one-man carrying capability were appropriate. American commanders wanted to know whether lightly trained American soldiers could carry and operate weapons that were considered too heavy by American doctrine. An experiment was conducted. American soldiers who had volunteered to participate in an intensive physical conditioning program similar to the Australian program were tested on their ability to carry and operate the Bren gun. The results were significant. American soldiers who had undergone intensive physical conditioning were capable of carrying and operating the Bren gun effectively through difficult terrain. American soldiers who had received only standard American military physical training were not capable of handling the weapon with the same effectiveness. This experiment suggested that the limiting factor in weapon-carrying capability was not inherent weapon weight, but rather soldier physical conditioning and soldier training. The Australian soldiers were capable of carrying heavier weapons because Australian soldiers had undergone physical conditioning that developed the capability to carry heavy loads for extended periods. American soldiers were not capable of the same level of performance because American soldiers had not undergone equivalent physical conditioning. By August 1968, American military leadership was grappling with the implications of this understanding.
American military could increase the carrying capability of American soldiers by implementing physical conditioning programs similar to the Australian programs. But implementing such programs would require significant changes to American military training methodology and American military culture. The slouch hat had influenced American military thinking about physical training. The Bren gun incident influenced American military thinking about weapon-carrying capability and the relationship between soldier physical conditioning and weapon capability. One American general made an observation that captured the broader significance of what the Australians were demonstrating. The Australians are demonstrating that soldier capability is not fixed. Soldier capability is a function of training and physical conditioning. If we train and condition our soldiers as the Australians train and condition their soldiers, our soldiers will be capable of carrying and operating weapons that current American doctrine considers too heavy for one man. The question is whether American military is willing to implement the training and conditioning programs necessary to develop that capability. By 1969, American Special Operations Units had begun to implement training and conditioning programs based on Australian methodology. These programs developed soldiers capable of carrying and operating heavier weapons and equipment than conventional American military doctrine considered appropriate. But conventional American military units continued to operate with weapons that were designed to be light enough for one man to carry and operate effectively with minimal training and conditioning. This created a divergence in American military. Special Operations Units developed soldiers with high physical conditioning, capable of carrying and operating heavier weapons. Conventional military units continued to use lighter weapons designed for soldiers with lower physical conditioning. The slouch hat represented Australian military effectiveness in tactical operations. The Bren gun incident represented Australian influence on American understanding of the relationship between soldier physical conditioning and soldier capability. These represented different kinds of Australian influence on American military in Vietnam. The slouch hat influenced tactical operations. The Bren gun incident influenced American understanding of soldier physical conditioning and soldier capability. By the year 2000, American military doctrine still reflected the understanding that soldier capability was a function of physical conditioning and training. American military personnel understood that soldiers with higher physical conditioning could carry and operate heavier weapons and equipment than soldiers with lower physical conditioning. The principle that soldier capability was not fixed, but was a function of training and conditioning, had become part of American military culture, particularly in special operations. One special operations officer, when interviewed about the principles of soldier development, cited the Australian methodology. The Australians demonstrated that soldier capability is not limited by inherent physical limitations, but by training and conditioning. If you develop soldiers with higher physical conditioning, those soldiers can perform capabilities that conventional doctrine considers impossible. That principle remains relevant today. Sergeant William Torrance, who had demonstrated one-man capability to carry and operate the Bren gun, continued his military service and eventually achieved the rank of major. When Torrance was interviewed years later about his demonstration with the Bren gun, he reflected on the significance of what he had demonstrated. "I was simply doing my job," Torrance said. "I carried the weapon because I was trained to carry it, and because my physical conditioning was adequate for the task." But apparently this was surprising to American officers, who had assumed that the weapon was too heavy for one man to carry.
The lesson is that assumptions about capability should be tested against actual performance, not accepted as universal truth. By the year 2020, more than 50 years after Torrance had demonstrated one-man capability to carry the Bren gun, American military personnel were still using the understanding that soldier capability was a function of physical conditioning and training. The slouch hat had become an icon of Australian military effectiveness. The Bren gun had become a symbol of how Australian soldiers had influenced American understanding of soldier capability. Both had contributed to how American military evolved in response to the Australian presence in Vietnam. The phrase, "too big for one man to handle," had become part of military lore, representing the moment when an Australian soldier had challenged American assumptions about weapon weight and soldier capability, and had demonstrated that the assumptions were based on incomplete understanding of what trained and conditioned soldiers could accomplish.